Welcome back to Literary Leap. In today's video, we are diving into one of the most dramatic and pivotal scenes in Julius Caesar Act 3, Scene 2. This is the moment where the fate of Rome hangs in the balance and the power of speech takes center stage. Brutus and Mark Antony each address the Roman citizens following Caesar's assassination, but it's Antony's clever manipulation of words that shifts the tide in this battle for public opinion. In this video, we'll break down both speeches, analyze the literary devices, and explore how rhetoric, emotion, and persuasion comes into play. Whether you're studying for exams or just a fan of classic literature, this scene is a masterclass in the power of language and its impact on politics. So let's leap into it and unpack the genius of Shakespeare's writing. After the assassination of Julius Caesar, Brutus and Cassius, who were part of the plot, addressed the people in the forum to justify their actions. Now, the citizens naturally are in a state of confusion, and Brutus wants to speak to them and explain why Caesar was killed. The citizens demand an explanation. They want to hear why Caesar was killed. The repetition of satisfied emphasizes their need for clarification. So Brutus asked the citizens to follow him and listen to his speech. Here, audience refers to people who will listen to him carefully. In other words, he asks the people to listen carefully to what he has to say. Now, Brutus instructs Cassius to go to another part of the forum and divide the citizens into two groups. This is a strategic move so that each of them can speak to different groups of people. Now, Brutus separates the citizens into two groups. Those who want to listen to him will stay with him, and those who want to listen to Cassius will follow Cassius. So Brutus promises to give a public explanation for Caesar's death, saying he will explain it clearly to the people. Here, rendered means to be provided with or to be explained. So Brutus will present his reasons for Caesar's death or the assassination of Caesar. Now, the first citizen expresses a desire to listen to Brutus. The second citizen says he wants to listen to Cassius and then compare the reasons both Brutus and Cassius give for Caesar's assassination. The third citizen announces that Brutus has climbed up to the pulpit to speak and asks for silence so everyone can hear him. Here, ascended is used metaphorically to suggest Brutus is now in a position of authority, not just physically, but symbolically as he is about to speak to the people. Brutus now addresses the people of Rome after the assassination of Julius Caesar. Brutus here wants to explain his reasons for killing Caesar and persuade the people that he did it for the good of Rome, not out of personal hatred. So Brutus asks the crowd to be patient and listen to him fully before forming any opinions. He addresses the people by calling them Romans, countrymen, and lovers, trying to appeal to their sense of patriotism and emotion. He asks them to listen to his reasons carefully. Now, Brutus then asks the people to trust him because of his personal honor. He implies that his actions are driven by his moral integrity, and if they respect his honor, they should believe his words. Brutus then asks the people to judge him wisely, using their reason and senses to understand the truth. Censure refers to criticism. Brutus then goes ahead to assure the crowd that his love for Caesar was as strong as any of Caesar's closest friends. He emphasizes that he did not act out of personal malice. He then explains that he did not love Caesar any less than others, but he loved Rome. His actions were motivated by his desire to protect Rome and not to harm Caesar personally. So, this kind of contrasts between loving Caesar less and loving Rome more. And it highlights Brutus's reasoning that his love for Rome motivated his actions more than his personal affection for Caesar. He then asked the people whether they would prefer Caesar to be alive and be ruled over and live like slaves, or have Caesar die so that they can all live freely. So, this rhetorical question tries to make them see that his actions were for the greater good of the Roman people. Brutus asks questions that don't actually require an answer but are meant to make the people think about the importance of freedom over tyranny. Now, here we see Brutus acknowledges Caesar's positive qualities. He weeps because of Caesar's love for Brutus. He rejoices because of Caesar's fortune, and he honors Caesar because of his bravery. But he also says that Caesar's ambition led to his death. Brutus argues that Caesar's ambition was a flaw that threatened Rome's freedom. Then Brutus lists the emotions he feels: sadness for Caesar's love, happiness for Caesar's fortune, respect for his bravery, and finally the fact that he had to kill Caesar because of his ambition. So Brutus now puts forward a question to the people, and he asks who among the crowd was or is so dishonorable that they would choose to live as a slave. If anyone prefers slavery over freedom, he says that he has offended that person by killing Caesar. He asks who would not want to be a Roman citizen with the rights and freedom that come with it. If anyone prefers not to be a Roman, Brutus says he has offended them. Brutus also asks who would not love their country. If anyone does not love Rome, he says that he has offended them by killing Caesar. When he says, who here is so vile, it means he's asking who here is so wicked or so evil that he will not love his country. So, in these lines, Brutus tries to appeal to the emotions and patriotism of the citizens, using his honor and reasoning to justify Caesar's assassination. The repetition of who is here so at the start of the sentences emphasizes Brutus's challenge to the citizens to consider their own value or honor or love for Rome in the face of Caesar's death. Then Brutus pauses, waiting for anyone to speak up or challenging him, making his appeal more dramatic and forcing the people to consider his words. The people respond to Brutus's questions and tell him that he has not offended anyone. So Brutus naturally is relieved, as no one in the crowd has challenged him or accused him of wrongdoing. He feels that his actions were justified, or rather his words were enough to justify his actions. Brutus claims that he has done nothing to Caesar that the people wouldn't do to him if they felt it was necessary for the good of Rome. He suggests that if the people believe Caesar's death was necessary, they would also accept his death if it was required. The contrast between Brutus and Caesar highlights the idea that what Brutus did to Caesar is what the citizens might do to Brutus if necessary. Then Brutus says that the question of Caesar's death has been documented in the Capitol, the heart of Rome's government. Enrolled here metaphorically means that Caesar's death has been officially recorded like a legal document in the Capitol, showing its legitimacy. He explains that Caesar's honor and glory have not been reduced, and his offenses, like his ambition, have been explained as the reason for his death. Now, over here, we see Antony enters with Caesar's body, mourning him publicly. So, as soon as Antony enters with Caesar's body, Brutus points out that Mark Antony, although not involved in Caesar's assassination, will gain political power from Caesar's death. He implies that all of them, that is, all the citizens, will also benefit from Caesar's death by being free. Brutus then says that just as he killed his best lover, here it implies to Caesar, for the good of Rome, he is willing to die for Rome if the country requires it in the future. So this emphasizes his loyalty to Rome above personal relationships. So naturally, the citizens react to Brutus's words, and the citizens shout in support of Brutus, wishing for him to live and continue leading them. There is the first citizen who suggests that they should celebrate Brutus like a hero and bring him back to his house in a triumph, a victory procession. The second citizen proposes that Brutus should be honored with a statue just like other great men in his family. The third citizen suggests that Brutus should be made the new Caesar. Caesar over here refers to the title that is given to the emperor. Now, the fourth citizen praises Brutus, saying that the best qualities of Caesar, the qualities like Caesar's leadership quality, should now be present in Brutus. So, Caesar's better parts refers to Caesar's noble qualities, and crowned is used to symbolize the honor and recognition that Brutus should receive. And the first citizen again expresses his desire to celebrate Brutus and bring him to his house with loud cheers. Brutus once again starts to address the citizens as countrymen to appeal to their sense of shared identity as fellow Romans. He wants to remind them that they are all part of the same nation. The second citizen immediately calls for quiet so that everyone can hear Brutus. So this shows respect for Brutus and a desire to listen attentively to what he says. The first citizen repeats the call for silence, urging the crowd to be quiet so that they can focus on Brutus's speech. Brutus requests that he be allowed to leave the stage by himself after his speech. He does not want to be the center of attention any longer. He then asks the people to stay and listen to Mark Antony, who will speak after Brutus is done speaking. He wants them to pay attention to Antony's words, as Antony will speak about Caesar and his legacy. So Brutus asks the people to show respect. Grace over here refers to respect to Caesar's body and to Antony's speech, which highlight Caesar's virtues and the good things Caesar did for Rome. Now, Brutus then explains that they have given Antony permission to speak about Caesar, indicating that Antony's speech is allowed by the conspirators, including Brutus. Brutus urges the crowd to stay and listen to Antony. He says that no one should leave until Antony has spoken. Brutus wants to ensure that Antony gets the opportunity to speak and honor Caesar properly. He earnestly requests the people to stay and listen to Antony. Once he is done with this, Brutus leaves the scene and he steps aside to allow Antony to speak. So in these lines, Brutus steps aside, allowing Antony to speak while ensuring the crowd remains in place to hear Antony's words about Caesar's legacy. This shows Brutus's desire for order and respect, as well as his belief that Antony's speech is necessary for the people to understand the full picture. So we see the citizens are excited to hear what Mark Antony has to say about Caesar after Brutus's speech. They want to make sure Antony speaks positively about Caesar, especially regarding Brutus, as they are still uncertain about his actions. and Antony begins his speech by addressing the crowd. Now, as he is about to begin, the first citizen calls for the crowd to stop and listen to Antony, showing eagerness to hear what Antony will say after Brutus's speech. The third citizen suggests that Antony should take a position of authority to speak. This shows their respect for Antony, who is now about to speak. Antony expresses gratitude to the citizens for giving him the chance to speak, acknowledging that they allowed him to do so in honor of Brutus. The fourth citizen is curious about Antony's opinion on Brutus and wants to know if Antony will speak positively or negatively about him. The third citizen explains that Antony has expressed gratitude towards the citizens, acknowledging Brutus's role and speaking in a respectful manner. The fourth citizen suggests that it would be wise for Antony to avoid speaking badly of Brutus in public, as the crowd is still loyal to Brutus at this point. So we see that right now the crowd is for Brutus, and if Antony goes ahead and makes the mistake of saying anything against Brutus, the crowd might just attack him, or maybe even decide not to listen to him. Now, the first citizen declares that Caesar was a tyrant, suggesting that his rule was oppressive. This is a direct reference to the justification for Caesar's murder given by Brutus. The third citizen agrees with the first, emphasizing that it is a good thing that Caesar is no longer in power and they are fortunate to be free from his rule. The second citizen calls for quiet and attention, wanting to hear Antony's speech and not engage in more conversation before hearing what he has to say. So Antony begins addressing the crowd by calling them gentle Romans, a term that is both respectful and flattering, aiming to win their favor. The citizens once again call for silence so they can hear Antony's speech clearly, showing their respect and curiosity. Now, Antony starts his speech by calling out to the crowd as friends, Romans, and countrymen. This is a direct address aiming to create a sense of unity with the people. The phrase, "lend me your ears," is an idiomatic way of asking them to listen carefully to what he says. Antony starts by saying he is not here to praise Caesar, but only to bury him. So this is a rhetorical strategy. On the surface, it seems humble, but he subtly implies that Caesar deserves more than just burial. He deserves praise. The statement also draws attention to the fact that he is not following Brutus's lines of reasoning. Antony then quotes a famous idea: people often remember the bad actions of others while their good deeds are forgotten and buried with them. Now, this line sets up the idea that Caesar's good deeds are being forgotten while his alleged evil deeds, like his ambition, is being remembered. So Antony is saying that the same should happen with Caesar, that the evil Caesar supposedly did should be remembered, but his good deeds should not be forgotten. This is a clever way of introducing his argument. Antony acknowledges that Brutus has already told the crowd that Caesar was ambitious. However, he implies that Brutus's definition of ambition might not be correct and he will soon challenge it. Antony concedes that if Caesar was ambitious, it would indeed be a serious mistake. Grievous fault means a serious mistake, and that Caesar paid for his mistake with his life. However, this is a part of Antony's strategy to make the crowd consider the accusation of ambition. Antony begins a series of ironic repetitions of the phrase, "Brutus is an honorable man." By repeating this, Antony subtly questions the honor of Brutus and the conspirators. He actually uses sarcasm to highlight the contradiction between their actions, that is, murdering Caesar, and their claimed honor. Antony then contrasts Brutus's view of Caesar with his own personal experience. He says Caesar was a loyal and just friend to him, which makes his murder even harder to accept. Antony repeats Brutus's claim that Caesar was ambitious, while reminding the crowd that Brutus is supposedly honorable, which makes the audience question whether Brutus's judgment is truly fair. Antony points out that Caesar brought many prisoners of war to Rome and their ransoms filled the Roman treasury. This act, which actually benefited Rome, is used to suggest that Caesar was not driven by selfish ambition but by a desire to help Rome. Antony contrasts Caesar's supposed ambition with his compassion. He tells the crowd that when the poor cried, Caesar wept with them. And then he goes on to say that true ambition should be cold and ruthless and not compassionate. Had Caesar been really ambitious, he would have been cold and indifferent to the sufferings of the poor. But instead of being that, Caesar used to be compassionate. He even wept for the poor. Antony repeats the idea again, forcing the crowd to reflect on the inconsistency between Brutus's claim and Caesar's actions. Antony refers to the time when he offered Caesar a crown 3 times during the Lupercal festival and how Caesar refused it each time. If Caesar had been truly ambitious, according to Antony, he would have accepted the crown. Now, this is used to challenge the idea that Caesar was ambitious. Now, Antony is once again seen repeating the sarcastic praise of Brutus's honor, continuing to undermine his credibility. He clarifies that he is not trying to directly attack Brutus's argument, but instead to share his own experiences with Caesar, which of course are different from Brutus's claims. Antony reminds the crowd that they once loved Caesar, and if they had a good reason to love him, then they should have a reason to mourn his death now. So, this is a rhetorical question meant to stir emotion and make the crowd question their own actions. Antony laments that judgment and reason have been misplaced by barbaric instincts. The crowd is no longer thinking logically or rationally, and Antony uses this line to emphasize how unjustly Caesar has been treated. Antony asks for the crowd's patience as he is overwhelmed with emotion. His heart is metaphorically in the coffin with Caesar. He needs a moment to collect himself. Now, in this speech, Antony repeatedly uses irony when he says, Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men. Now, Antony's repeated use of this phrase is an example of dramatic irony. He says one thing, but the reputation of honorable man makes it clear that he does not believe it. The audience also has started to understand that Antony is being sarcastic. We also see Antony using a lot of rhetorical questions. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious, and was this ambition? Antony uses them to make the crowd think about the contradictions in the accusation against Caesar and to guide them to the conclusion he wants them to reach. My heart is in the coffin there with Caesar. Here, Antony uses a metaphor to express his grief. He says his heart is figuratively with Caesar in the coffin, which shows the depth of his sorrow. So, Antony's speech is a powerful example of persuasion. He uses irony, emotional appeal, and logical reasoning to sway the crowd and turn them against Brutus and the other conspirators. Now, through his repeated use of honorable man and rhetorical questions, Antony exposes the contradictions in Brutus's reasoning and evokes sympathy for Caesar, gradually inciting the crowd to mourn his death and seek justice. He wants to utilize or flame the sympathy that the crowd has towards Caesar. The citizens of Rome naturally react to Antony's speech. They begin to question their previous belief about Caesar and reflect on what Antony has said. So they show signs of sympathy and confusion, and their opinions about Caesar start to shift. So this express their emotions and consider the possibility that Caesar may not have been as ambitious as Brutus claimed. So the first citizen says that he finds Antony's words reasonable and convincing. Methinks is an old fashioned way of saying I think. The citizen acknowledges that Antony's argument makes sense and is starting to believe in Antony's perspective. The second citizen agrees with the first, suggesting that if one thinks carefully about the situation, Caesar has been treated unfairly. Great wrong means that Caesar's death was an injustice. The third citizen, still quite uncertain, asks the others if Caesar really was wronged. He also expresses concern that someone even worse might come to power in Caesar's place, which shows his unease about the consequences of Caesar's death. The fourth citizen reflects on on Antony's earlier point that Caesar refused the crown 3 times. He concludes that because Caesar refused the crown, he must not have been ambitious. So this shows how Antony's speech is beginning to change the way the citizens view Caesar. The first citizen says that if it turns out that Caesar wasn't ambitious, then the people who killed him will pay a heavy price. Dear abide it means pay a heavy price, meaning that they will regret their actions. Dear here means costly or painful. The second citizen feels sympathy for Antony, noticing how much he has cried, comparing Antony's eyes to fire, emphasizing the intensity of his grief. So this is a simile using as to compare the redness of Antony's eyes to fire. The third citizen now praises Antony, saying there is no man more noble than he is. So this shows how Antony's emotional appeal has won over the crowd and they now respect him greatly. The fourth citizen is excited to hear Antony speak again and tells the others to pay attention. So this shows the growing interest in Antony's speech and how the citizens are becoming more engaged. So in a nutshell, these lines show how the citizens' opinions about Caesar and his death begin to change under the influence of Antony's speech. They start to feel sympathy for Caesar, question Brutus's motives, and praise Antony for his emotional and convincing words. Now, through these reactions, Shakespeare reveals the power of speech and how it can manipulate public opinion. The citizens are clearly being swayed by Antony's clever rhetoric and his emotional appeal.